Number 7. So I want to follow up on what happened, the rest of the story. When I got back from Burning Man, Stephen and I sat by the river, re-engaged in our relationship through this radical honesty place. And I just want to make the point that when you are really in that place of integrity, deep integrity, where you are willing to disappoint another rather than betray yourself, magic happens. For us, it was an invitation for Steve to meet me in that place of integrity, and he talked about his dark night of the soul, and he did some fact checking on his fears about who I am and how I've always shown up in our relationship. And even when we weren't so conscious with each other and we weren't so good at all the communication stuff as we are now, there was always this lens of honesty with each other. And so we sat by that river, we committed to radical honesty, and we had this practice before. And I want to point this out. It came from Men's Breakthrough, which is this beautiful healing community that my husband's been a part of for 8 years or so. He went on to become part of the leadership team, and so it's been deeply woven into our lives over these last several years. And part of their practice is to hook up with a buddy every morning and have this check-in with each other, 15 minutes each direction, active listening, no interrupting, just being a sacred witness to each other in that process, and giving men the opportunity to talk about their feelings, what their challenges are, what their fears are, and be witnessed in that. And so he had done that for 3 or 4 years with a buddy, and then it got complicated. I guess a couple of years with a buddy, and it got complicated trying to work out schedules. And he said, "Would you be my morning buddy?" And I was like, "But I'm not a buddy. How does that work?" And so we ended up coming up with our own sort of unique check-in, and we started to read books together. And the first book that we read was The Power of Grace by David Richo, R-I-C-H-O. And if you're not familiar with his work, I highly recommend it. He has books, I think, Being an Adult in Love. Power of Grace was the first one that we read together. And he has his 5 A's that he says every human being needs to feel love: appreciation, affection, attention, allowance, acceptance. Those 5 elements. And so we would read a chapter, or for about 20 minutes, we would discuss what felt relevant in the moment, reflections that we both had. Sometimes it was so spot on, it was spooky. Sometimes we'd read something and go, "Oh, that feels like that landed just for us today." Other times it was just sort of keeping this flow between us to keep the focus on living our highest expression, staying true to ourselves. Wherever else happens in the day, we would start the day with this sweet reading meditation, if you will. And then we have cuddle time. And cuddle time is me cuddled up on his chest, and we have this particular way that our bodies fit together just kind of perfectly, and we just breathe together. And there's this beautiful nervous system co-regulation that happens. And sometimes when his blood pressure gets really high, and it does from time to time, he will specifically, curl up with me, and my breath, my heartbeat, our heart coherence can help calm his nervous system, and he calms my nervous system. So something that was missing for both of us as children, that physical connection, that safety in physical connection, we are giving to each other now. And that, you can feel it, like we cuddle up and it feels good, and then all of a sudden the body starts to relax into each other, and we have this coherence. And we start our day with that coherence. And I'll say to him, "Hey, what A's can I give you today?" And this is an opportunity for each of us to really think about, well, what do I need? And for two humans that grew up putting our needs last, this has been a practice, a good working practice for us to say, well, I could really use some attention today. Well, what would you like attention around? Well, I feel like I have this big thing going on in my head about work or about the bells wanting to compete here, about what's happening on the property or what's happening in my world. And I would really like to schedule some time with you. And so a date is made. And maybe it can happen right then because we don't have to rush out the door. Or sometimes it's, hey, how about we sit down, later today and we talk this through. So asking for attention, for some of us who grew up feeling like we were too big, too much, children should be seen and not heard. This is a big thing to ask for attention. The asking for affection, that's always an interesting one, but it's a really powerful one between us, and it's a really powerful one because, as I mentioned before, my early sexual trauma, I need a little bit of an on-ramp. I need a little bit of an intimacy warm-up, especially the emotional intimacy before we just jump right into the physical intimacy. And so by him saying, I could really use some affection, and I'll say, can you say more about that? And it could be, I'd love to have your hands on my chest. And sometimes I'll just put my hand on his heart, and skin to skin is often the number one mode of affection that we find. Other times it's a spontaneous moment for us, and that happens far more regularly now than it did before we had this morning practice. So we have, we've gotten into a rhythm and a pattern and a safety space with each other. Sometimes he'll say, what days can I give you? And I'll say, I could really use some allowance today, which is basically give me a grace day. I am overwhelmed. I have a lot going on. I'm running at full speed. And we often talk about our schedules, Sundays or Mondays, like what's happening this week, and this is happening, that. And so knowing that allowance is going to be a feature of the week, and then asking for it explicitly really just creates so much space, because I'm not running around, nor is he saying, is everything okay? Are you all right? What's happening? No, he knows that I am flat out focused on something, and I tend to hyper-focus. That's part of my neurospiciness. And so he, getting a heads up about that, basically takes him off the hook. He isn't running around trying to second guess what's happening. She doesn't love me anymore. That awkwardness of our neediness, not knowing how to show up. And when somebody's asked for allowance, you don't have to worry that it's personal. It's just what is in that moment. So in short, we call that a grace day. We just give each other as much grace as we possibly can for what's going on. And it also sort of creates an invitation. And Stephen, almost every day of our marriage, since the very beginning of our dating time, he'd say, how can I support you today? What do you need help with? And I never had that growing up. I never had that in my first marriage. And so when I say I need some allowance, if he's got the bandwidth and capacity, he might say, how can I support you? And it might be just, if you can just not worry about, I'm not going to worry about a meal today. I'm not going to worry about anything. You just take care of you. Let me take care of me. Or I could really use your help loading stuff in the car. Or I could really, so allowance. Appreciation. This one's really good. This is a rich one. This is where we don't take each other for granted. And when we feel like we're being taken for granted, we give the other a chance to show up, right? And he'll say, I could really use an appreciation today. And I go, great. How can I appreciate you? Now, keep in mind, appreciation is not about things that you do. It's about how you're showing up. So what we're reinforcing is each of our abilities to show up consciously in challenging times, right? Or in situations that arise. And so he might say, this thing we've been dealing with the bank or the county or whatever our challenges at the moment, he said, I could really use an appreciation. And I go, oh, you're right. You do it so seamlessly. You do it so invisibly to my awareness. Please let me reinforce how appreciative I am of how you're navigating all of the nuance and challenges of that situation. And if I may, and sometimes I can offer specifically something that I've witnessed, like the other day I noticed that you got off the phone, and normally in the past, your default mechanism would have been to fuss and fume about something. And I'm noticing that none of that happened. You just took it in stride and you didn't take it personally. And that's a big reflection of growth that I'm seeing in you. And so, affection, attention, allowance, appreciation, and acceptance. The fifth one, that one, we don't use that one very often. I'm just sitting here contemplating, what would be acceptance? My trip to Burning Man. I need you just to accept that this is what I need right now. And it's almost like an allowance situation, but it's even a step further. And if you go through David Richo's book, he does a much better job than I am explaining the nuance of each of these 5 A's. And that has become our morning practice. We read, we cuddle, we connect with each other around these 5 A's, and this is a big one. It is the container. It's the safe container for us to bring up things that maybe happened the day before or have been brewing, and you have been processing something. And I might say, honey, something came up the other day and I've been looping around it, and I'd like to sort of process it out loud with you and see if I interpreted your intention wrong, or if I've missed some part of the communication that is vital here. And so I might then replay something that happened, and I'll give you an example. This is sort of an ongoing thing with us. Stephen will ask me what I want, like what restaurant do you want to go to, and I'll give a suggestion, and I go, oh no, or what would you like for dinner, and I'll say, hey, I'd love some fajitas, how's that? And you go, oh no, I don't want to do that. And I just because my nervous system's more important than making a point sometimes, I just let it go. But then in that there builds a little bit of a resentment and a point of disconnection where I'm not being radically honest. I'm editing. I'm walking on eggshells. And that's a spectrum of degree, but I know everybody does this. And so in that moment, it's an opportunity to level up with each other, to clean up whatever's out there, whatever's sort of playing in the background. And for me, it's been this really powerful recalibration around my projection onto him. I grew up in a home where you could tell by the way the car, even almost before my dad parked the car, like how he drove in the driveway, what the evening was going to be like. And there were often martinis, late afternoon, late lunch martinis before. I'm amazed more people didn't die on the road, or maybe they did, but the amount of drinking and driving in the business world was quite profound, and I witnessed it a lot. My father would come home, as he would say, half in the bag, and I would begin to immediately read his signals, which, this is what we do. Children learn to tap dance in high-risk situations and begin to read nuance at such a finite level that it, over time, becomes a superpower, but it also becomes a limiting projection before it's necessary or before it ever happens. Like I would read something in Stephen and go, you said this and you said it this way. And I'm confused by that. It's not in integrity, the way that I perceive us to be with each other in this commitment to conscious intimacy. And he'll go, oh man, I'm really sorry it came across that way. Here's what was going on for me. And then he'll spill his beans, and then I realize his beans are not my beans, and I was taking his beans on as my problem. And so this cleanup on aisle 3 that we have created a container for, a safe, shameless container. That word shameless is going to come up a lot in this next week as I build us towards this healing bridge, the shameless healing bridge on Friday night. So just shameless container where we can meet each other, and he might come back and say, yeah, I was feeling that edge too, and here's what's going on for me and what my concerns are. And you're right, I didn't show up as cleanly, as appropriately as I could or should have. And so, all right, so let's do that now. And we have the cleanup on aisle 3. And now that languaging is so comfortable between us, I'll say, hey, I've got to clean up on aisle 3. You got a moment? And sometimes he'll say, no, not right now. Or he'll say, yeah, for sure. Like, we're both so committed now to the cleanup because the reward on the other side, the pattern interrupt of the resentment, the frustration, the misinterpretation of each other's intentions, like, that's just such a waste of emotional and psychic and love between us. And so he came home, I came home from Burning Man, we came home from that trip to the river, and our morning practice deepened. And it became the container for the radical honesty and that intimacy. And so I just, lesson 7 is a big one. And I encourage you to, if you don't have a partner in your life, to look around you and see who's on the same path that you are. And maybe you can create a morning practice or a weekly practice where you just check in with each other. And maybe it's just 45 minutes, but you go through, you're sharing something that elevates your consciousness, your awareness, you're learning together. Sometimes Stephen will bring a video to me and go, oh, this one's really cool, check this out. And we put our reading aside for the day, or vice versa. So we look for things to bring to each other. And what's interesting about the books that we've read, 2 that I recommend for everybody right off the bat, Power of Grace by David Richo and The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And I recommend that to everyone that I work with on their healing path, because it's one of the best introductions to the role of observer, where you get out of the noise in your head and you observe the noise in your head. And so we've now gone through like 40 plus books. We've done some books on tape. I love to read out loud. He loves to listen. The only way I can really comprehend is if I hear it and see it and speak it. Like, my ability to memorize is a real challenge for me, and comprehension is tricky for me. I have a very busy mind. And so if I'm reading it out loud, I'm hearing it, I'm having the vibration of the words. It's just so, and thankfully he loves the sound of my voice, and he is willing to listen. And every once in a while he'll go, let me have a turn, and that's great, So it's an evolving practice, and it is something now we're going on about 6 years with. And we don't do it every morning. We do it probably 6 days out of 7. Sometimes, like when I'm in a big crunch, getting ready to do an event, presentation, he understands that this grace day is going to be multiple days. Sometimes he wants to sleep in. He's had a bad night's sleep. And I go, no worries. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Like, there's nothing pressing, because we've got this release valve every morning. I can go 2 or 3 days without, I don't have to jump or ambush him with my feelings, nor does he ambush me with his feelings. We have this container. And when we step into this container together, magic happens. So I'll just invite you to consider who you can have that container with and what kind of a process you want to engage with in that container. And it's worth it. It's an investment, but it sets the tone on our nervous system, on our interaction, and that spills over into everything else throughout the day. The other people we interact with, the other situations that we're called to engage with, it's worth it. And I'm not a great meditator. I'm not somebody who can just sit quietly. I have a very, very active mind. So I call this my meditation, just slowing down, co-regulating, whispering, loving. And then we get up and we start our day. And throughout the day, there's a softer sweetness between us and with the world. May it be so. Aho.